I will never forget the day my son came home with his backpack hanging off one shoulder, his eyes staring at the floor as though even the carpet was too heavy to look at. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there in the hallway, frozen, until I gently touched his arm and asked what had happened. That's when the words tumbled out in a broken whisper. "They kicked me out, Mom. They said I was distracting everyone." I didn't understand at first. My son, Daniel, had always been quiet, the kind of boy who preferred sketching in the margins of his notebook to causing trouble. Distracting others? It didn't make sense. But as he lifted his sleeves and I caught a glimpse of the faint, silvery scars that climbed his forearms like ghostly branches, my heart broke all over again. Those scars weren't new to me, but they weren't supposed to be visible either. We had worked so hard. He had worked so hard to heal, to feel safe again after everything he had gone through the year before. Long sleeves had become his shield, his silent armor against the curious eyes of classmates who didn't understand. That day, however, it was warm. Too warm. His sleeves had slipped up as he leaned over his desk. And that's when the whispers began. By lunchtime, the whispers had turned into mocking laughter. A boy at his table, a boy who had picked on Daniel before, leaned in with a cruel smirk. "What are those? Did you fight a bear?" The table erupted. Daniel tried to pull his sleeves down, tried to hide, but the noise grew. And instead of protecting him, instead of silencing the laughter, his teacher sent him out of class for causing a distraction. When he told me this, I felt a sharp, helpless anger rise in my chest. But then, just days later, something unexpected happened. Of all people, it was the bully's mother, the woman I least wanted to face, who saw my son's scars for herself. And in that moment, the story took a turn I could never have predicted. Because sometimes the very person you believe will stand against you becomes the one who forces everyone to finally see the truth. Kindness can be hidden in the unlikeliest of places, waiting for the moment when it matters most. The next morning, I lingered in the school parking lot longer than usual. Normally, I would watch Daniel walk up the steps, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his backpack, and drive off once he disappeared through the double doors. But that day, I stayed. I could still hear his trembling voice from the night before, and I couldn't bring myself to leave. Through the windshield, I saw him pause at the entrance. A cluster of boys stood there, laughing, shoving, doing what boys often do. But when Daniel approached, the laughter changed. It sharpened. It cut. His body stiffened as one of them pointed, pulling his own sleeve up in mockery. The rest followed, mimicking scars with exaggerated lines scratched on their forearms. Daniel didn't fight back. He didn't shout. He just walked past, staring straight ahead, as though the only way to survive was to pretend he was invisible. My chest tightened. No mother wants to interfere, but every part of me screamed to step out of that car and end it. Instead, I clenched the steering wheel, promising myself I would speak to someone, anyone, before this spiral swallowed him whole. Later that day, I arranged a meeting with the teacher. She greeted me with a tired smile, the kind that tells you she believes she has already done her job. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I understand your concern. But Daniel's, well, he draws attention to himself. And the other students can't focus when there's discomfort in the room." Discomfort. That word stung more than any insult. My son's scars weren't a distraction. They were the remnants of battles fought in silence. But instead of compassion, he was being framed as the problem. I left that meeting feeling like the walls of the school were closing in. It wasn't just the bullies. It was the very system that was supposed to protect him. And still, a part of me hesitated to push too hard. Parents who complain too loudly often find themselves labeled as difficult. But then again, what was I if not his voice when he couldn't find his own? What I didn't know was that another parent, someone I thought of as part of the problem, was about to notice the truth in a way I never could have orchestrated myself. And that moment would change everything. Sometimes life places unexpected witnesses in the exact place where truth needs to be seen. It happened 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, in the most ordinary of places, the school gym. Parents had been invited for the monthly, open activity, a chance to watch our children during physical education. I almost didn't go. Work was waiting, and honestly, I dreaded another afternoon of polite smiles with parents who barely disguised their whispers about Daniel. But something nudged me. Maybe it was mother's instinct, or maybe it was the guilt of knowing he would scan the bleachers for me. Either way, I went. The gym buzzed with noise as kids bounced basketballs and ran relay races. Parents clapped, chatted, and scrolled on their phones. I spotted Daniel near the back, waiting his turn in line. His sleeves were tugged down, but the heat inside the gym was stifling. Sweat dampened his collar, and I saw him tug nervously at the fabric as if trying to decide whether suffocation was worse than exposure. And then it happened. He jumped forward for his relay run, the cuff of his sleeve catching against another boy's hand. It slid up, and in an instant, the pale lattice of scars was there, lit under the fluorescent lights. The laughter was immediate. A few boys pointed, some whispering theatrically to their parents as though it was entertainment. My heart dropped into my stomach. But what I hadn't realized, what no one could have planned, was that one of the mothers sitting a few rows away from me was watching closely. Her name was Marissa, the mother of Josh. Josh, the very boy who had mocked Daniel the most. I braced myself. I expected her to look away, to join the chuckles, maybe even to shoot me one of those pitying glances that cut deeper than cruelty. Instead, she didn't move. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing not in judgment, but in recognition. Her expression shifted in a way I couldn't read, something between shock and sorrow. After the game ended, when the parents were filing out and children were chasing each other toward the locker rooms, Marissa approached me. She hesitated, almost as though the words caught in her throat, before whispering, I saw. Her eyes flicked toward Daniel's retreating back. Those aren't what the kids think, are they? And in that moment, I realized I was being tested. I could brush her off, keep our family's pain hidden, or I could trust a woman I had quietly resented for months, to see the truth of what her son had helped ridicule. It was the first time I wondered if an enemy could become an ally when compassion was allowed into the room. Because sometimes the rules of survival shift, and the real test becomes whether you're willing to let someone else carry part of the weight you've been holding alone. Marissa's words lingered in the air like a question that refused to fade. I nodded slowly, my throat tightening as I searched for the right response. They're not what the kids think, I finally said. My voice came out lower than I intended, weighted with years of silence and guarded explanations. But they are real. And they're his. Her eyes softened, though she didn't press me for details. Instead, she looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her purse. Josh told me he and the other boys, well, that they'd been teasing your son. I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was just silly playground talk. But when I saw those scars, her voice trailed off. I should have asked questions sooner. We stood there, two mothers in a crowded gym, yet it felt strangely private. She wanted to say more, I could tell, but her son burst through the locker room doors, laughing with his friends, and she stiffened. Maybe we could talk sometime, she murmured, before walking away. That night, I replayed her words again and again. Talk sometime. Did she mean it? Or was it just one of those polite exits people use when they feel uncomfortable? And if she did mean it, what exactly would I tell her? Would I lay bare the nights Daniel had sat in his room, silent, carving his pain into his own skin because he didn't know how else to let it out? Or would I protect his story, keep it in the family where no one could misunderstand or twist it into gossip? The puzzle weighed on me. I wanted allies, but I didn't want pity. I wanted Daniel to be seen, but I didn't want him exposed. 2 days later, the answer seemed to come on its own. I found a note in Daniel's backpack, folded tightly into quarters. It wasn't in his handwriting. It was clumsy, smudged with pencil marks. The words were simple, almost hesitant. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Josh, I stared at that note for a long time. Something had shifted. Somewhere between the gym and home, the boy who had mocked my son had glimpsed enough of the truth to put pencil to paper. And yet, the puzzle grew deeper. Was this just a moment of guilt? Or could it become the first step towards something real, something that might protect Daniel rather than wound him? It was the first flicker of light in a long tunnel, but I had to decide whether to trust it or brace for disappointment. Sometimes the hardest puzzles in life are not about solving others, but about deciding when to let someone solve a piece of you. The note sat on our kitchen table for 2 days before I finally showed it to Daniel. He was hunched over his homework, pencil tapping in distracted rhythm, when I slid the folded paper beside him. "What's this?" he asked, suspicion already in his voice. "Just read it," I said gently. He unfolded it, and as his eyes moved over the words, his face tightened. I braced myself, expecting anger or dismissal. Instead, what I saw was something more complicated, relief tangled with disbelief. "Josh wrote this." I nodded. Daniel set the paper down, pushing it away as though it might burn him. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "He'll still laugh tomorrow. They all will." But he didn't throw it away. He left it there, lying between us, and I could see him glance at it more than once. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Marissa.
"Can we talk? Just you and me."
Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at the small coffee shop near the school. I told myself it was only curiosity, but deep down I knew I wanted answers. When I arrived, she was already there, her hands wrapped around a cup that had long since gone cold. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I need to be honest with you," she said. Her voice trembled in a way that surprised me. "When I saw your son's scars, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Because," she paused, swallowing hard, "because I know what they mean." I froze. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. A boy, maybe a year older than Daniel, smiled faintly at the camera. "My brother," she whispered. "He's gone now." He hid his pain until it was too late. "And when I saw your son, it was like seeing him all over again." The world seemed to tilt. I had walked into that cafe ready to defend my son, ready to fight. Instead, I found myself staring at another mother's private grief that mirrored my own fears. Marissa leaned closer. "I don't want Josh to be the kind of boy who laughs at scars he doesn't understand. I want him to learn what I didn't learn soon enough, that those scars are stories, not shame." And in that moment, the revelation hit me like a thunderclap. Marissa wasn't here as an enemy, or even just as an apologetic parent. She was here because she carried her own scars, invisible but no less real. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about protecting Daniel. It was about teaching others to see him and themselves with compassion. Sometimes the deepest healing begins not when someone pities your pain, but when they recognize their own reflection in it. After that conversation, I drove home in silence, my thoughts a storm. Part of me felt lighter, knowing Marissa's reaction came from a place of understanding rather than judgment. But another part of me felt burdened, because now the secret we had guarded so closely wasn't ours alone anymore. The next morning, as I packed Daniel's lunch, I slipped the note from Josh inside his bag. I didn't say anything, but I hoped he would see it again during the day, maybe with fresh eyes. I wanted him to know that not everyone was against him, that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he felt. When he came home that afternoon, though, his shoulders were slumped lower than ever. He tossed his bag onto the couch and sat without a word. I waited, giving him space. Finally, he whispered, "They're still talking. They don't stop, Mom. Even when the teacher tells them to, they just wait until she turns around." My chest ached. I wanted to storm into that school, demand change, but I also knew how quickly children could twist adult interference into more fuel for cruelty. And then Daniel said something that cut deeper than all the rest. "I wish I didn't have them. The scars. I wish they weren't mine." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marissa's face in the cafe, her brother's photograph, her vow that she didn't want Josh to grow into cruelty. But what about the others? What about the teachers who looked the other way? What about the kids who laughed but weren't brave enough to stop laughing? Could one boy's apology, one mother's compassion, really shift an entire tide of cruelty? A week later, the answer came in an unexpected form. Daniel had forgotten his lunchbox at school, so I went back to retrieve it. As I stepped into the hallway near his classroom, I overheard voices. A teacher's voice, sharp, exasperated, and Daniel's voice, quiet but trembling. "You need to understand," the teacher was saying, "when you distract the class, it's not fair to the other students. We can't keep going through this." And then Daniel's reply, barely audible, "I don't try to distract anyone. I just exist." Those words hit me like a blow. I just exist. My son was apologizing for breathing, for taking up space, for being seen. I felt something shift inside me that night, a resolve I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about enduring anymore. It was about confronting the silence that allowed cruelty to fester. But standing up meant risk. Risk of backlash. Risk of exposing Daniel more than he wanted. Risk of being dismissed again by people who preferred comfort over truth. And yet, deep down, I knew, if I didn't stand up now, the scars on my son's arms would never be the last scars he carried. Sometimes the hardest battles are not against those who mock us openly, but against the quiet acceptance of those who let it happen. The following Monday, I marched into the school office with my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I had asked for a meeting, not just with the teacher, but with the principal, the school counselor, and yes, even Marissa. I knew I was taking a gamble by inviting her, but something in me believed she needed to be there, that her voice could bridge what mine alone could not. The conference room was too small, the kind of room where the air feels heavy and the fluorescent lights expose every crack in your expression. Daniel sat beside me, shrinking into his chair, while the teacher across from us tapped her pen against a clipboard as though preparing for battle. The principal adjusted his tie, eyes wary but neutral, and the counselor gave me the soft, patient look I had grown to despise. I began simply. My son isn't a distraction. He's a child who has been mocked, ridiculed, and punished for something that isn't his fault. The teacher sighed, already defensive. With respect, Mrs. Carter, the other students are unsettled by what they see. It's hard for them to focus. That's when I felt the fire rise in me. Unsettled? Then teach them compassion. Teach them respect. Don't punish the boy who's already carrying more than they can imagine. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. My son doesn't need to cover up his scars to make anyone else comfortable. What he needs is to be safe in your classroom. The room grew tense. For a moment, I feared they would dismiss me again. But then, quietly, Marissa spoke. She's right. All eyes turned to her. She looked down at her hands, then back up, her face pale but determined. My son was one of the worst offenders. I've seen it at home, the way he mimicked Daniel's scars. And I let it go because I thought it was just childish teasing. But when I saw Daniel in the gym, it was like watching my own brother all over again. He hid his pain until it killed him. And I won't stay silent while my child contributes to someone else's suffering. The silence that followed was deafening. The teacher shifted uncomfortably, the principal cleared his throat, and the counselor's eyes filled with something more genuine than before. Daniel sat rigid, staring at the table, but I saw his hand twitch, just slightly, toward mine. For the first time, maybe he felt the tide shifting too. The principal finally spoke. You're right. We've handled this poorly. From today forward, we'll address this as bullying, not as disruption. And we'll begin with an assembly about respect and mental health. Every teacher will be briefed. Every student will be reminded. He paused, his voice lowering. And Daniel, you will never again be asked to leave class for simply existing. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. Sometimes confrontation isn't about winning an argument. It's about refusing to let silence win. The assembly was scheduled for the following week. I sat in the back of the auditorium, surrounded by restless parents and teachers, watching as rows of students filed in. Daniel sat near the middle, his sleeves pulled down, his body tense as though bracing for another round of whispers. But this time, something was different. There was an air of anticipation, a heaviness that wasn't just his to carry anymore. The principal began with the usual pleasantries, but then the tone shifted. Sometimes, he said, students come to school carrying battles we cannot see. And sometimes those battles leave marks. Our responsibility is not to judge them, but to honor them, to protect each other in ways that go beyond homework and grades. The room quieted. No laughter, no fidgeting. Even the teachers leaned forward. Then the counselor spoke about scars, both visible and invisible, and how they tell stories of survival, not shame. She reminded the students that mocking someone's pain is not just cruelty, it's complicity in their suffering. Her words were firm, unflinching, but laced with compassion. And then, to my surprise, Marissa stepped onto the stage. She wasn't on the program, but the principal must have agreed. She held a small photograph in her hand, the same one she had shown me at the cafe. "This is my brother," she said, her voice steady but raw. He smiled for pictures, but inside, he was breaking. None of us saw it clearly until it was too late. When I saw Daniel's scars, I realized I was watching history repeat itself through my own son's cruelty. That ends today. A hush fell over the room. Every eye was locked on her. She went on, speaking not as a parent defending a victim, but as someone confessing her own failure and vowing to do better. And because of that honesty, the message sank deeper than any lecture could have. When the assembly ended, something remarkable happened. Students approached Daniel, not all of them, not suddenly his friends, but enough to matter. A few murmured awkward apologies. One boy asked if he could sit with him at lunch, and Josh, trembling but resolute, handed him a folded piece of paper in front of everyone. Daniel opened it cautiously. Inside was a single sentence: "Your scars mean you survived." I was wrong. For the first time in months, I saw Daniel's lips twitch upward. Not a full smile, he wasn't ready for that, but a flicker. And for me, that flicker was everything. Years later, when I look back on that day, I realize it wasn't just about Daniel's scars being seen. It was about the shift that happens when silence breaks, when cruelty is called out, when empathy steps into the light. That assembly didn't erase the pain, but it planted something stronger. A legacy of courage, of honesty, of refusing to hide. And Daniel? He still wears long sleeves sometimes. But not because he's afraid. Now, it's simply a choice. And when someone does catch a glimpse of those faint lines, he no longer rushes to cover them. He lets them exist. Because they do not define his shame, they define his survival. Sometimes the greatest legacy we leave is not in the scars themselves, but in teaching others to see them for what they truly are, proof that kindness must always speak louder than cruelty. Life didn't magically transform after that day. There were still stumbles, still moments when Daniel came home quiet and withdrawn, still times when I had to remind teachers and classmates alike that compassion isn't a one-time lesson. But the difference was this: we weren't alone anymore. The silence had been broken. Marissa kept her word. She didn't just apologize once and disappear. She became vocal, not only with her son but in parent meetings, pushing for better awareness around mental health and bullying. Her honesty gave other parents permission to speak, to share struggles they had been hiding in their own homes. Slowly, the culture at the school shifted. What had once been whispered mockery began to fade into open conversations about kindness, resilience, and respect. Daniel, too, began to change. Not overnight, but in small, steady ways. He joined the art club again. He let a new friend sit beside him at lunch. He even volunteered to share one of his drawings at the school showcase, a picture of a tree with branches marked by jagged lines, each one painted with gold. When I asked him what it meant, he simply said, "Scars make things stronger, Mom. They don't have to make them ugly." And as I watched him stand proudly by that drawing, explaining it to curious students who nodded with new understanding, I realized something. The boy who once wanted to disappear was learning to take up space again, not as a distraction, but as a light. To anyone listening, I want to leave you with this. If you ever see someone carrying scars on their skin, in their silence, or in the heaviness of their eyes, don't look away. Don't reduce them to whispers or judgments. Choose compassion. Ask a question. Offer a kind word. Because you never know when your voice might be the one that interrupts cruelty, the one that shifts an entire story. For us, it was a bully's mother who finally saw what others refused to see. For you, it might be a chance encounter, a small act of courage, a willingness to speak when it would be easier to stay silent. And sometimes, that is all it takes to turn a scar from a mark of shame into a testament of survival. Because in the end, kindness is never wasted, and silence is never neutral.